Okay, it looks like it's time to start. Good evening. I want to thank you all for taking the time to attend the meeting.
Buenas tardes, les quisiera dar la bienvenida a nuestro webinar.
My name is Jolene Bradford, and I'm with VTA's Community Outreach and Public Engagement team. I also manage VTA's Senior Mobility Program. Next slide.
Siguiente imagen,
please.
Por favor.
Hold on one second, we're having some technical difficulties.
Estamos teniendo un poquito de dificultades técnicas. Por favor, sepan esperar un poquito.
Thank you. Spanish interpretation is available. If you look at the bottom of your screen, you'll see in the interpretation icon. Go ahead and select that. You'll select Spanish, and then remember to mute original audio. When you do if you click the interpretation button also, you will see English. Go ahead and select English if that's the language you want to hear.
Inglés o español, el lenguaje que quieran.
Next slide.
Siguiente imagen.
So, VTA would like to acknowledge the Native American tribal history of the properties that we are discussing today.
Quisiéramos reconocer la propiedad de los pueblos nativos de esta zona.
I have a question. Does everybody hear Spanish, or are you hearing English as well?
¿Escuchan ustedes el español o solo escuchan el inglés?
Spanish?
I'll jump in. I think for those that are hearing Jolene very quietly, it may be because you're not in the English channel. So you want to select the English interpretation channel on the bottom right.
So I'll move forward. So VTA would like to acknowledge the Native American tribal history of for the properties that we're discussing today. VTA acknowledges that we're talking about projects on ancestral lands of the Ohlone, specifically the Tamian, Muwekma, Ohlone tribes. We acknowledge them as the first people of this land who lived here before missionaries and settlers were displaced or displaced them. Still, they remain living, thriving members of Bay Area communities today. It's possible that historical and cultural resources may be discovered when VTA begins development projects. VTA will make all efforts to preserve those remains and ensure that they're returned to communities most connected to them. Next slide, please.
Jolene, before you progress, I'm seeing some comments still in the Q&A where people are hearing multiple speakers. So just to try this again, if you are hearing more than one language, on Zoom, there's an interpretation world icon. And if you only want to hear English, click on that interpretation world button and select English, and you should only hear one language, which is Jolene speaking loudly. And if you want to only hear Spanish, in that same world icon, select Spanish, and you will only hear Spanish. That way you won't be hearing both. So I hope that's clear. Back to you, Jolene.
Okay. Please let me know if this continues to be a problem. So we're here this evening because VTA is...
I'm sorry, I'm going to stop you because I'm hearing Jolene in Spanish room, and I just want to make sure everybody else is fine. I'm hearing Spanish.
So are you muting the original audio?
Yes, I am. Wait. Now go.
Okay, can you hear me?
Okay.
Okay, perfect. Guys, remember, if you're in the interpretation room and you're listening to Spanish, you want to mute the original audio. You can hear two people if you're listening that way. So we're here this evening because VTA is considering transit-oriented developments at the Capitol and Branham parking lots. What we hope to accomplish in this meeting is to share information about development opportunities around transit and to gather your feedback. Next slide. Your input this evening will help shape the development projects. Nope, go back. Sorry, I'm going to just say it when we do it. Okay. Due to the size of the property, we'll be developing in phases. The first phase will be affordable housing, which will be built by high quality developers overseen by VTA. Okay, next slide. Thank you. We'd like to do a brief introduction of those that will be presenting this evening, as well as those staff and consultants who will be answering your questions this evening. So with VTA, we have Jesse O'Malley Solis, who is the TOD program manager. We have Jessica Hitchcock, who is the project manager here for the projects, one of them. And then we also have another project manager, Christina Nape, who's here today. And then we have Brent Pierce, who's the transportation planner. Now going on to the County of Santa Clara, we have Consuelo Hernandez here today, and she's the director of the Office of Supported Housing. And we also have Natalie Monk. She's the HCD division manager for the Office of Supported Housing. And then we have our consultant team here. We have Lori Moffett-Felberg and Rituraj Sharma. And then we'd like to do a shout out to Catalyze SV and Alex Shore for the support that he's given us with our outreach efforts. Next slide. So we'd like to welcome our elected officials and their staff. And I want to make sure that I'm saying that we have the right people here. So we have Michael Lomeo, who's from Councilmember Foley's office, and Matt Quevedo, who is from Councilmember Mahan's office. And I believe we have Councilmember Foley that's here tonight, as well as Councilmember Mahan. Do you see Mahan, Councilmember Mahan? I know that Councilmember Mahan wanted to say a few words, but let's see if Matt Quevedo, maybe he can help us.
Hi everyone, Matthew Quevedo here. Unfortunately, the council member was pulled into another event and will not be able to make it, but I am here in his stead. I am the acting VEP president, which represents the Carson neighborhood. We had the pleasure of meeting with 24 of you on Sunday to discuss your vision for the two parking lots. And we were able to pass out over 400 flyers to neighbors in the Carson neighborhood as well, communicating about this project, this meeting tonight. So thank you everyone for attending. VTA is looking forward to hearing from you directly, and this is your opportunity to speak to them on what you would like to see here at this development and here at this site. And we, of course, in the council office of District 10 will continue to work with all of you as this project moves along. So thank you so much for having us.
Thank you so much, Matt. Next slide. Really, we do want to hear your input and your feedback, and that will help us will help design or help us with what we want or what you want to see with the development. So Now for some housekeeping. Please take a minute to read the slide. Our community is changing around us, and that can make people feel uncomfortable. For some people, it's not very welcomed, and for others, the change may be welcomed. As we talk about the proposed projects this evening, we want to make sure that this is a respectful meeting for everyone. Please try to be kind to all participants, even those who may not have the same viewpoints as you. I'd also like to point out that this meeting is being recorded by VTA and will be on VTA's YouTube channel. I'll also have it linked to the project page along with the presentation. Next slide. I think that we're still having some audio issues. Let me see if I can take care of that. Did that take care of the problem? If you go in, you can choose English.
Si ustedes van ahí, pueden escoger
can-
inglés
Or you can just go off and that
o
should
pueden
make it.
apagarlo y eso sería suficiente.
Okay, so let's do
Okay,
this.
vamos a hacer
Everybody,
esto.
please go
Todos,
to the
por favor,
interpretation channel
vayan al canal de
and select
interpretación,
English.
seleccionen inglés.
If you need to listen to English,
Si
if you're
necesitan
participating
escucharlo
in
en inglés.
Spanish, choose
Si
Spanish
necesitan
and mute
español,
original audio.
aprieten el canal de español y apaguen el sonido original.
I'm wondering if it's better if no one is using the Spanish interpreter at all.
Me pregunto si es mejor que nadie
We
use
just turn
el
off
canal de
interpretation.
español para apagar
Can we
el
find out?
canal de interpretación.
Um,
¿Podemos descubrir
Al, will you
eso?
please ask if there's anybody using the interpretation? If they are, can they please push the raise hand button?
Al, ¿podría usted decirnos si hay alguien usando el canal de interpretación?
You were cutting in and out.
Se nos corta la comunicación.
Okay. Al, can you ask in Spanish if there's anybody listening to the interpretation? If they are,
Yes.
can you please have them use the raised hand button?
¿Hay alguien en la audiencia escuchando el canal en español? Si hay alguien que esté queriendo escucharlo en español, por favor, levanten la mano.
And I see one raised hand.
Veo una mano levantada.
I think Virginia was asking a question earlier. Her
Creo
hand
que
came up
Virginia
Okay.
estaba
a little bit
haciendo una
earlier when you were
pregunta
doing your slide.
hoy temprano.
Daryl Ives is also. So let's just check real quick if they
Vamos
need
a
interpretation.
chequear rápidamente
Okay.
a ver si necesitan interpretación.
Do you want to send them a message and ask?
Mándale un mensaje, por
We need to
favor,
unmute them.
y
Oh,
preguntarle.
okay.
It's raised
Okay.
hand.
And I did the wrong one. It went down.
We're going to go a little off course here for a real quick second, folks.
Yes.
We just want to make sure everybody can hear. Virginia, I'm going to unmute you. Are you able to hear okay? Hopefully you can see. I clicked the ask to unmute. Hopefully you see that.
You should see a bar that looks like this that says unmute myself. And that will let you unmute yourself.
Hi, this is Virginia. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh,
Do you need Spanish interpretation?
English.
English.
English, okay. And then there's another person that's identified as SP5ST. I'm going to ask you to unmute. If you'll select the unmute myself button. Hi, do you need language interpretation?
No, but no,
We will,
earlier.
no, we speak English, but I'd like you to turn off the interpretation.
Okay,
Yes.
we're gonna turn it off.
Thank you.
Okay, does this make it better? We've ended the interpretation.
Yes.
Okay,
Right.
perfect. Now, if you want to go ahead, I'm going to mute you now. Okay, okay, perfect. Thank you. So how can you participate this evening?
¿Cómo pueden ustedes
You guys were-
participar esta noche?
So how can you participate this evening? You can use, one of the ways that you can do it is we're going to be using the question and answer, and you can go ahead and type in your questions or your comments, and we'll be answering those as we go through the meeting. And then there's going to be a question and answer time or portion during the meeting, and you can select the raised hand function. And what we'll do is at that point, we'll be asking you we'll unmute you and we'll ask you to accept the unmute, and then you guys can ask your questions. So if the slide shows where you would, the Q&A is where you type in your questions. The raised hand is down at the bottom of the bar. Next slide. Okay, so we want to get to know who's here today, who's joining us. And we're going to do that with a poll. And after the poll, we'll move forward in reviewing the agenda for this meeting. Christina, will you launch the poll, please?
Launching the poll right now.
Perfect, thank you. So I'm going to give you guys a couple of minutes to fill this out. There are 3 questions. On the right-hand side, you're going to notice that there is a gray bar. That will help you scroll down to see all of the questions.
All right, we've got a little less than 70% of people who've responded. Can those of you who haven't answered, please be sure to fill out the poll. And as Jolene said, use that gray bar on the right to be sure to scroll down so you get all the questions. Oh, 80%, we're getting there. All right, we'll give just a little bit longer for the last few people to answer. All right, thank you all.
Okay. Will you please share the results? Perfect. So you guys can all see the results. Let's look at these. So 93% of you live in San Jose. 85% of you are homeowners. 78% of you drive. And then 23% of you bicycle. 25% take transit. Let's go down and look a little bit more about how you heard of this. 15% of you heard about the meeting through email. 18% of you heard of it through another way. 13% of you guys heard of it through an organization or local group. That's great. And then 15% of you heard it from your local elected official. So that's great. Thank you. You can end the poll now. If you guys have the bar, if you still see the poll in your screen, you can go ahead and use the X and exit it out so that you can see the PowerPoint. Next slide. So today we're going to provide you a lot of information this evening. We'll introduce VTA, share information about transit-oriented development, affordable housing, and VTA's affordable housing policy. You'll receive information about the benefits of transit-oriented development and the development opportunities at both the Capitol Station and the Branham Station. The presentation will wrap up with the project process and next steps. And once the presentation's complete, we'll open it up for questions. Please note that we're providing you with a lot of information this evening, and we'll do our best to be able to spend quality time answering your questions. Next slide. So what does VTA do? When people think about VTA, they always think about bus or light rail, but VTA actually does more than that. VTA is an independent special district, which is governed by a board of directors. The board is made up of 12 local city and county elected office holders. This wheel shows all the ways that VTA is touching transportation throughout Santa Clara County. Our core transit service is bus, light rail, and our ADA transit, our ADA paratransit service. But we also do other things. We construct transit facilities like the new Milpitas and Berryessa BART stations. We're responsible for local highway improvements like the 101 Blossom Hill interchange, which will help traffic flow more smoothly. We fund Caltrain along with San Mateo and San Francisco counties. And we encourage the integration of transportation and land use management so that we design a community that works for everyone. VTA has its transit-oriented development program, which is really focusing on the land use transportation integration. My colleague Jessica will share more information regarding transit-oriented development, as well as VTA's affordable housing policy. I'll now turn the time over to Jessica. Next slide.
Thank you, Jolene. And I just want to take the time to thank everyone for bearing with us with these technical difficulties. I wish we could be in person and we didn't have to, have all this stuff, but I really appreciate your sticking with us. My name is Jessica Hitchcock, and I am a TOD project manager at VTA. I wanted to start off with just a little bit of background about transit-oriented development, sometimes called smart growth, and what it is. So transit-oriented development is a strategy about creating great places around transit stations. The goal is when you get off light rail or the bus, as you see on the pictures on the right, you want to be able to walk into places that are livable and attractive, places that are vibrant with residential, parks, shops that connect well to the surrounding communities. One question we often hear is, why does VTA develop its properties? Aren't you a bus agency? And the reason is that building and encouraging these types of places helps VTA boost ridership on our buses and light rail. These projects generate revenue that we can plow back and invest to improve public transit. And what this does for your neighborhood is it creates attractive places that can be focal points for the community to live and to gather. Next slide, please. As VTA develops sites for TOD, a key tenet is we are committed to being a good neighbor. I was at the Branham meeting a few months ago, and I just want to acknowledge that we heard many of your concerns. Our community is changing, and it's changing all around us. And I know that can make us feel very uncomfortable. Some of us like the change, some of us don't like the change. And I want to assure you that VTA is committed to engaging with this community to hear your input throughout the development process. So in that spirit, I want to start off by addressing a key question that was asked at the last meeting at Branham, which is, why are we doing this here? Why did VTA choose this location for a TOD project? And to answer that, VTA selected these sites because the city has designated the capital area as an urban village, which means the city is encouraging smart growth by transit. We're developing other sites we own in urban villages, at Berryessa Bart, at Tanian Station, at Blossom Hill, for example, and at employment centers like in Mountain View. As this city grows, as this region grows, people will continue to move here for jobs, and they'll have children. And we need to prepare for that. We have an option to grow like we do now in a way where people sit in their cars for hours, commuting, clogging up our freeways. Because VTA owns land by transit, we have an opportunity to steer some of that growth by transit with the hope that we can live and move in a way that's more sustainable in the future. So as we develop the station, we are asking for your input to help shape these development projects. And I'm seeing a lot of the questions that come in for the Q&A. I want to encourage your questions so that we can get to these later on in the presentation. Next slide, please. So in the last meeting we hosted at Branham, many people expressed concerns about homeless encampments that have cropped up in this neighborhood, along the bike path, in the grassy area near Capitol and Narvez, along the Branham Bridge. And one of the ways to address homelessness is to provide affordable housing for all. And it's not just the homeless who need housing. Working families, young professionals, teachers, firefighters are no longer able to rent or buy homes in the county now. Next slide, please. In 2016, VTA's board adopted an affordable housing policy in response to the housing crisis we're facing. The goal that our board set was that 35% of housing built on VTA property will be affordable. And to make that happen, VTA is partnering with Santa Clara County's Office of Supportive Housing to build an affordable home ownership project at Branham and affordable rental project at Capitol as phase one of the Capitol project. Next slide. To highlight just the extent of the housing crisis, I wanted to show you this graph that compares rents to how much people earn. So Santa Clara County is the fourth most expensive county in the United States, following Marin County, San Mateo County, and San Francisco. So on the left, you can see that the average asking rent for a 2-bedroom is a little over $3,000 a month. So basically all the people working in your household have to make $10,000 a month or $122,000 per year just to afford that 2-bedroom apartment. So, let's take a sample household, a husband and a wife and their 2 kids. The wife was, the checkout clerk at Target on your last trip there. Her husband works in construction. So, if you take the retail sales salary and you add it to the construction salary, the 2 of them earn about $104,000 a year with their 2 kids. That family can't afford that average 2-bedroom apartment here. And not just them, neither can all the people who work full-time just above the minimum wage, like the people who pick up our trash, the people who detail our cars, the janitors who clean our offices. I mean, even if you had a nurse's salary and your partner is a restaurant host, they can't afford that 2-bedroom apartment. Next slide, please. The lack of affordability also extends to home ownership. So I know 78%, I think, of the participants today said they were homeowners. So this was shocking to me when I pulled it. So the chart shows the percentage of Santa Clara County households who can afford the median home price, which was 1.3 million in San Jose last month. So in 1993, before the first dot-com wave, 41% of households could afford the median home price. In 2021, only 1 out of every 5 households could afford to purchase. So I just want to take a moment. I know we use the raise hand function to, to see who needed a Spanish translation. I want to use that function again because I'm just curious, if anyone in this Zoom room or this, participating in this call has any friends or coworkers, family members, grown children, grown grandchildren who have left this area because they couldn't afford the cost of housing. If you know anybody who fits that, please raise your hand. Wow. Yeah, we're seeing a lot of people. Yeah. So thank you for that. We have at least 14 participants who've raised their hands and 2 panelists who know people as well. Here at VTA, we talk a lot about affordable housing, especially among our team. I know Jolene, who presented earlier, would you mind just quickly sharing your story with us? I think she's muted or she's frozen. No, Jolene, I can't hear you. Yeah, Jolene and I work together closely, and Jolene lives in Stockton, and she commutes into VTA's offices from Stockton. Jessie O'Malley Solis, who's our TOD program manager, with the number of children she has, she's eligible for affordable housing. I had a friend who moved away recently, and it's ironic, she was an affordable housing developer, and she couldn't afford a house here because her husband is a stay-at-home dad during COVID. And so sometimes I just find it useful to hear other people's stories. So we're going to play a video from Catherine Hedges, who I believe is in the audience tonight as well. And she lives in an affordable apartment in San Jose.
I'm from Southern California, and I grew up in a very impoverished family. We were lucky to have naturally affordable housing. It was a duplex, so we had affordable rent and a backyard. It was a pretty safe neighborhood. It was a good place to grow up. I live in affordable housing. I'm in downtown San Jose. It's important to me because the rents here are astronomically high because I have a business, but I struggle enough with the business. I don't always make a profit, and I actually depend on SSDI for income. Rents are so high that I just can't afford to live anywhere else. And it's a terrible environment for people to be commuting from Central Valley to, to bag your groceries or take care of you in the hospital or teach your kids. A really wide variety of people living on a building. I mean, about half the tenants are in permanent supportive housing, and half the tenants are, this is the workforce housing. We have people who work in retail, people work in daycare, people who do social work. I know someone who works at Target, and he was actually homeless and living out of his car and working at Target for a couple of years before he moved here. One of those essential service jobs, and he couldn't afford housing. I'm so fortunate to live in a building. I'm the first tenant in this apartment. I've been here for 5 years. I don't know what I'd do if I couldn't rent here at the rent I have.
Thank you, Catherine, for sharing your story. I'm going to pass it next to Lori from Dahlin, and she's a designer, and she's going to talk to us more about design and transit-oriented development.
Great. Thank you, Jessica. Again, Lori Moffett-Felberg. I'm a senior principal with Dahlin Group Architecture Planning. You've learned a little bit more about VTA, and in particular, their commitment to affordable housing. I think that it's such an important conversation because it touches all of us, whether or not we're in affordable housing or not. The people around us who support our communities need housing. And so it's great that VTA has an opportunity to be part of the solution to our overall Bay Area problem. So part of what I'm going to do tonight is provide a little bit more information on just what is transit-oriented development. Jessica started to explain it. I'm going to go through some more of the benefits it can offer. As you can see on this particular slide, it is a design strategy to cluster uses around transit in a pedestrian and bicycle-friendly manner. I actually pulled this definition right off of Google. And so there is a lot of information online that you can find. It's also, transit-oriented design is also many times referred to as TOD. And so we try very hard in our public meetings not to use jargon. We want to make sure everybody understands what it is we're talking about. But I will use both transit-oriented development and TOD a little bit tonight. And I wanted to make sure everybody was very clear on what those terms meant. Next slide, please. So one of the real defining elements of transit-oriented development is the ability to provide and include spaces that provide that backdrop for community events and other community benefits. So on the left-hand side of the screen is an example at the Pleasant Hill BART station. This is where the transit-oriented development creates a space that's used for community events such as farmers markets or other community-wide gatherings. And then on the right-hand side is the park directly adjacent to the VTA Tamian station. That's another great example of integration of community amenities with TOD opportunities. So these are the types of things that benefit the residents of the TOD, but also the entire surrounding community and neighborhood as they create that focal point. Next slide, please. Another benefit of clustering development around transit is the ability to take transit to go to other activities or events at other transit stops and other transit-oriented developments without ever having to get in your car. It's a very interconnected network of these focal points along transit. So you can take advantage of the services, the shops, the dining, and other TODs, again, without having to get on the freeways, without having to drive. And once at a transit-oriented development, you find it easy to walk to various destinations, such as your newly discovered new favorite restaurant. And so all of these transit stops actually tie together and allow for this interconnected opportunity for folks. Next slide, please. You know, another benefit truly is that when people take transit, they don't have to drive everywhere. And that helps reduce the congestion on the roads that we all use and face that congestion every day. So prioritizing walking, biking, and using transit, we can reduce the greenhouse gas emissions that also benefits everyone in the community. By taking people off the freeways, giving them access to quality transit, and giving them access to the services, shops, restaurants, work opportunities, and living next to those transit stops. Next slide. So I actually love this slide. I love these images because it truly illustrates the reality of our choices. We can sit in traffic or we can take transit. Sitting in traffic, that's about all you can do. Maybe take a phone call. Be stressed out by the time you get somewhere. You take transit, you can work, you can take a nap, you can read a book, you can catch up on the news, you can chat with a friend. And so it's a quality of life issue as well. And transit-oriented development, that clustering at the transit stops really significantly increases the number of folks who take transit. I know my own experience as an employer, when we moved our office from a location that had no access to transit directly adjacent to a transit stop, I had employees who now had options to live where they really wanted to next to transit. So we had a number of employees pack up and move to TODs, and even a couple of them sold their cars. And what this slide is really giving you is some hard data and my anecdotal data that households within a half mile of transit have a quarter to almost a third fewer vehicle miles traveled per day. VMT, it's another jargon for vehicle miles traveled, but it just means people drive a lot less. And in the Bay Area, 42% of residents who live and work within that half mile take transit, as opposed to only 4% who live further away. Again, this is the case for these urban villages that the city has identified for the transit-oriented development and the opportunity to provide these benefits for not only the residents, but everyone who lives in the Bay Area and partakes in going back and forth to work. Next slide, please. So Jessica noted earlier that we did have a meeting a couple of months ago, back in April, regarding the Branham station. And we heard a number of questions around development potentially impacting traffic on Narvaez. We understand it's a concern and we want to address it directly. So first, VTA has secured funding to study how to reconfigure the Highway 87 on and off ramps at Capitol and are in the process of selecting a consultant to study different options. Part of that process will also involve a series of community meetings such as this, where various options will be discussed. We anticipate that study kicking off early 2022. Secondly, VTA has received a grant to conduct an access study, which will look at all the circulation and access needs of this area. We want to make sure that any future development built at the transit stations is well integrated with the existing neighborhood, and they're able to work with the community in order to identify the improvements that will make it easier to walk, bike, and take transit from the Capitol and Branham stations. Recommendations may include traffic calming, appropriate parking, pickup and drop-off options, as well as pedestrian bicycle access. And there'll be additional Caltrans funding for the station access study. So they're working very hard to understand the dynamics of movement in this neighborhood and going through the effort of commissioning these studies by experts who this is what they do. Next slide, please. So as I noted during the last slide, there'll be comprehensive access studies done that address concerns and offer creative solutions. Additionally, a transit-oriented development is the opportunity to provide parking for transit needs and new residents in a way that also addresses neighborhood concerns. So the image at the bottom of the slide shows how a parking structure can do both while being shielded from public view by the surrounding building, thus creating a very pleasing and engaging streetscape, rather than just bulk parking out on the public street. Next slide, please. So, transit-oriented development, because it is clustering, because it is focused on transit, always also includes a focus on bicycle access and connectivity that enhances not only opportunities for the transit riders, but the entire neighborhood can benefit from looking at the system holistically. How do people move around? How do people get to the transit station, to the services and amenities and opportunities at the transit-oriented development at each of the transit stations? Next slide. In addition to bicycles, enhanced walkability can be achieved through elements of traffic calming, such as the intersection modifications you can see in the upper right corner, as well as enhanced pedestrian crossing markings. It's just a heads up that sometimes drivers need a little bit more focus on the fact that this is the pedestrian realm in this area, and I need to slow down and make it safer for people to cross. Even the streetscape of a TOD, transit-oriented development, can create a more walkable environment where you don't have to get in your car to access shops, dining, or gathering spaces and different events. And so all of these measures rolled together start to improve that public access space around our streets for bicycles and pedestrians. Next slide. So here at Riverview Transit-Oriented Development, the Riverview Apartments, you get to see how it all comes together. These images are all from this one location. So the transit-oriented development has provided high-quality housing supported by transit, shops, dining, and recreational opportunities in a true live, work, and play environment. I would add live, work, play, and move environment. You might be wondering what the impact this development had on the transit ridership of that stop. So the data came out after it was constructed that ridership increased by 137%. That is a significant increase in folks using transit because it's convenient rather than having to drive on our congested roads. So there, I gave you some statistics earlier on overall areas. This is a very specific example with hard data to show it actually works. It takes people off the roads and gets them into transit that's good for everybody. Next slide, please. So we're specifically looking at the opportunities at the Capitol and Branham stations. The photos on the left show the current condition of the parking lots that we're talking about. Even pre-COVID, these lots were typically no more than 20% full. So the sites are tremendously underutilized, particularly since they've been, the area's been designated an urban village by the city. The graphic on the right shows you in an aerial photo exactly the areas that we're speaking about tonight, outlined with red and a little bit of a red tone on them, and labeled the Branham Park and Ride and the Capitol Park and Ride. Next slide, please. So to do this in a holistically thoughtful manner, these two station areas are being viewed together as a master plan. You can see the green bubbles down the left-hand side of the graphic. Those denote areas of phase one. This includes the portion of the Capitol site just south of Capitol Expressway, which is anticipated to include affordable housing, a revised and enhanced bus drop-off and pickup area, transit parking, and community amenities. Phase one also includes the Branham lot down to the south, which will also provide affordable housing. Those are the two phase one areas, very focused on affordable housing, as Jessica noted earlier. Future phases at the Capitol Station are noted in the blue bubbles. They're not really bubbles, I'll call them bubbles because I'm not sure what else to call them. North of Capitol Expressway will include a mix of uses, including commercial uses and housing. The remaining area south of the phase one area of Capitol will provide additional housing and community amenities. Next slide, please. So as an architect, many times I get questions, well, this is just going to all happen immediately and we're going to see big changes tomorrow. This is a very lengthy process, and this slide illustrates just how long these things take to happen and just how many opportunities there are for future community input. So on this slide, the bars going across, right now we're at the top one. We're starting that community visioning process. The little plus signs and the little conversation bubbles indicates all the different times that the community has a chance to give their feedback, give their input, ask their questions. So right now we're in that community visioning. The next step will be take the listening from tonight and start to craft the idea of what should this be. The VTA board will go through and select a developer. There will also be these access, traffic, and parking studies completed. And then design has to happen. So the Capitol phase one and the Branham design will take some time. You can see that design stretches over a couple of years, and there's additional opportunity to be heard during that time. After all of that goes by, then the Planning Commission approval and building permits are issued. Only after that, sometime in 2025, would the construction begin on phase one. And then you can see at the very bottom, sometime even after that construction, probably 2028, then we start the whole process over for the future phase at the Capitol Station. So nothing happens quickly. These transit-oriented developments go through the rigorous process and review that all projects go through, just like any other development proposal. So this is not a one-shot, one-night deal. There's a lot of opportunity to be heard and to learn and to move forward together as good partners within a community. Next slide, please. So I'm going to turn it back over to do yet another poll. One of the things I did is I went through some of the different ideas around transit-oriented development. This poll, we really want to hear back from you. What of those ideas are important to you? So let's go to the next slide, and Jolene or Jessica or Christina, I'm not sure who's launching the poll.
It'll be me.
Okay, take it away.
Right, here we go. All right, we're about 50% there. Got about half of you, a little over half, who've submitted your responses. Everybody else can pitch in. Okay. We're at about 80% of respondents, or 80% of participants have responded. We'll give it a little bit more time to make sure everybody else gets a chance. It's only one question on this poll, so not too much scrolling this time. All right, we're at 90% of participants have responded. I'll give it a few extra seconds. All right. Thank you all. Lori, you should, or everyone should be seeing their responses here. Looks like we've got over 50% of respondents would like to see more public gathering places like a park or a farmer's market. Also better sidewalks and places to walk, with 49% of respondents. And just below that, we have 38%, 17 people said they'd like to see retail. And then slightly fewer, just 16, said they want to see housing affordable to all income levels. And 7 people said other. If you'd like to just throw in the Q&A what the other is, so we can be able to see that. All right, thank you all. If we can move on to the next slide. Yeah, go ahead and just X out of the chat there. All right, so here is our Q&A section tonight. Please feel free to either put questions into the Q&A. I know many people have been doing that throughout the presentation tonight, and we've been doing our best to answer those questions as they've come in. And you can also raise your hand, as we did a little bit earlier, if you'd like to ask a question verbally. The way our plan is going to go is we'll go back and forth, one speaker, one person in the chat. And I know that we've got a handful of people who have their hands up already. I just want to confirm that those hands are up for questions and not still left over from when we were previously having people raise hands. So let's scroll to the back here and start. Okay, so Trin Nguyen has a question. Are the parcels at Branham and Capitol Station designated as an urban village?
I can answer that. So the The area around the Capitol Station is in an urban village plan. I believe the official name is Capitol/Highway 87 Urban Village. I don't think the city hasn't moved forward with crafting that urban village plan, but it has designated that area as a UVP, urban village plan, for future development. I think the Branham station itself is not within the UVP boundary, but the Capitol Station area definitely is.
Thank you. Looks like we have the user SP5ST. You have your hand up. I'm going to ask you to unmute so you can ask your question. For some reason, I'm having issues asking you to unmute. I guess if you can put that in the chat, we can answer that question of yours.
I think, Christina, he has to accept the unmute.
Okay. It looks like you're unmuted. Do you want to answer? Do you want to ask your question now?
Yeah, I'm just curious. What are we looking at as far as the number of homes or apartments in the area, in these two areas?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we're at the, just the beginning phases, the project proposal phase. So I don't have a concrete answer because we don't quite have a developer on board yet. At this point, though, VTA is planning to offer the 2.5 acres at Branham and 2 acres at Capitol for development. And that represents about 1/4 of the total land area that we own there. So we've run a few preliminary, fit tests to understand how many units that could accommodate. So at Capitol, that 2 acres can fit 120 to 150 units. And at Branham, it's about somewhere between 50 and 75 units. I know that the number of units also can vary depending on the type of project proposed. I see some comments in the Q&A about, is it going to be senior? Is it going to be family? So, like a family project usually has larger unit sizes so that there are fewer units total, while a senior project has smaller units. So sometimes you can have more. But I hope that gives you a sense of the range. And once we have a developer on board, we'll be able to answer that question more definitively.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, we have a question in the chat from Elaine or Alan. I apologize if I mispronounce your name. Will the units be 100% accessible to low-income owners?
So that's a great question, Alan. I think that so at Branham, we're looking to move forward with an affordable home ownership project. So at that station, we expect to have all of those units available to affordable home ownership. Capitol is expected to be an affordable rental development. And so that will be for people who are looking for rent.
And then we have someone, Marion, you have your hand up. I'm going to request that you unmute yourself so you can ask your question. You should be getting an option to, yeah. Looks like
Hi, I did not have a question. My hand was raised from something previous.
Okay, no problem. All right, let's go to Rick then. I'm going to ask that you unmute yourself so you can ask your question.
Sure. So, hi, Rick Gonzalez. I live in San Jose. I think affordable housing is a big problem here for sure, and I can see maybe why the ridership might be a bit low because a lot of the houses around the area certainly were designed for the car. So my question is here. So when I think of like the type of development that you guys are proposing, I often think of like really likable areas that my friends, myself, and people likely on this call like to go to, like Santana Row or Palo Alto or San Francisco. Those areas attract people downtown Campbell today in cars. Are you guys saying and proposing that the development is going to be kind of like a mini gathering spot that services the community?
Sure, I can try to answer that, Rick. Yeah, so I hear you. There are a lot of places that we go that we love, that we get and we drive there, right? And this is also a place that, and we're not saying that this is a place that you can only get to by transit, right? And so I see a lot of these questions in the Q&A, like, oh, but you can't just make it just only for people who ride transit, and that's not the intent. I think, and I hear also these comments about the bike lanes and all that. I think what's really important, I think, to note about transit-oriented development is that we care about how people get there in totality, right? And transit is really important, and because a lot of times what happens is you build something and you get off the bus and it's kind of a horrible place. I mean, there's no street trees, or you don't feel safe. And that discourages people from riding. And so we want this to be a place where transit riders and people who walk from the neighborhood feel safe to get there. I see that also in the poll, neighborhood retail shops, 40% of people really care about that. We want this to be a place that if neighborhood shops are included, that the community who lives and works in this area can walk there, shop there, buy a coffee there, whatever that may be, and access this place in a way that they feel comfortable. So we're really talking about all modes of access. I know Lori alluded to this earlier in her presentation. With respect to a lot of the Highway 87, improvements, we will be launching an access study, and I want to reiterate this, to think through and thoughtfully how people move around this space in a way that is a livable place. And I, especially since, public gathering space, 56% of people care about this being a public gathering space. And I think that there's a lot of elements that we can fold in here that don't only prioritize the car in order to make this place like a focal point for the neighborhood.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I mean, it sounds like it's a chance to kind of weigh in and make it that. So I'd love to see people do that.
Yeah, and I hope this starts to provide an opportunity to do that, right? I just want to reiterate, we heard the 87 off-ramp issues. Brent noted in the Q&A that there will be a study that will be launching next year to study how we can improve that. And so to the extent that there are improvements that can come out of this development process, if we can try to address that as part of this development, we will try to do that. And this is why this is so important to hear kind of what's important as a priority to you.
All right, and it looks like we've got quite a few people who've been jumping into the chat, VTA folks, answering your questions there. So I'm just going to go ahead and go through with hands that are up, because it looks like all the open questions in the chat have been answered. So Elaine, I'm going to request that you unmute yourself, or Alan, I apologize if I'm mispronouncing your name.
Yeah, that's fine. Alan works as well. Yeah. So question on traffic, which is a concern here, and parking, right? So I don't think it's been adequately addressed. Narvez is a single lane on both sides, and Branham has been reduced to 2 lanes on either side to provide for a bike lane, which almost nobody uses. So question, and it's created congestion, actually created quite a problem, and it's actually caused a few accidents, and some people have gotten hurt. So question is, what studies have you done around traffic easement on those 2 streets? And then this has come up before, and I know you've tried to address it, is what are we doing around that Capital 87 on-ramp, which is a big problem, right, from a congestion and traffic issue?
I'm happy to take that question.
Ahead,
Thanks for
Brent.
your comments. You had a lot of great questions. I was trying to keep up with you in the back there, so I appreciate it. All of you had great questions tonight, specifically with regards to Branham. So Branham is a really interesting street in San Jose. It's a Vision Zero corridor, which means that there are a lot of safety issues on the street. And so San Jose has done themselves a considerable amount of studying about how to make that street safer, how to reduce deaths, how to reduce accidents, and how to prevent injuries there. And one of the ways that they're trying to do that is actually slow down the traffic, not remove space for autos, but provide the access that's needed and do it in a way that's safer. So what you described is one way to do that, and provides more mobility options for people. With regards to Narvaez, we really probably will be looking at Narvaez in a lot of details because it connects both Branham and Capitol sites. We really want the community's idea on how that street can be improved, either from an access perspective, maybe space for other people walking or biking. There were some comments about from some cyclists wanting maybe more protection or safety elements installed here, and we will do that as part of the access work that will be led by VTA. And then the third comment you had with regards to the interchange, we got a lot of comments about that tonight. Thank you so much. We are just kicking off some very early work to look at the Narvaez Capitol interchange for 87. It was really designed at a different time, and a lot of San Jose has built out around the interchange. Most of that work is funded from the Communications Hill project. And so we're working with San Jose as a partner, and we're going to be we're hiring a consultant right now. And we're going to be coming out to the community probably sometime this year to think about new options for how it can be improved operationally and from a safety perspective as well, which is really important. So thanks for your comments.
Because we have a chance for a follow-up, the Branham, Capitol, and Chenoweth, to be looking at, are the three main access points to get from east to west. So, I mean, that should be considered, right? That's the reason why everyone's taking Branham, why everyone's taking Capitol, why everyone's taking Chenoweth. So, anything that can be done to ease that, maybe another road, right? It's just people don't have a lot of options, right? So that has to be considered as part of this.
I appreciate that. Yeah, we'll think about that as a team of how we can think about those streets. And when we begin kind of more of that detailed access work, we'll take those comments into consideration when we're putting that scope together. So we appreciate that.
Thank you.
All right, Gail, looks like you have your hand up. I'm going to request that you unmute yourself so that you can ask your question. You should be getting a little pop-up that says, the panelist, Christina, would like you to unmute yourself.
I don't have anything I wish to say at this moment.
Okay.
Thank you.
No problem. So we can move on to Dat. I'm going to request that you unmute yourself so you can ask your question.
Yeah, I basically live in the area, and I do ride bike on the Narvaez. And I do have friends who work in transportation at Caltrans, and I do ask them frequently about how to improve this. To be quite honest, 87 Capitol is really a bad intersection or interchange already. 87 is already bad as far as the traffic. Unless you have some kind of a solution to address that, more people you dump on it are not going to get worse. And as far as my friend who worked in a Caltrans, he said there is no solution in the future as he knows of. With that being said, also I know that you're talking about, we will look at the bike, but where can you get the land to improve the bike? The only way safety is that I've seen is that like maybe you do safety like on Branham, where you have a separation and a flexible post and all that. But where would you get the land? Are you going to take more land?
Well, that's a great thought, Dat. I'll address the biking first, which is we don't have time tonight to maybe do a lot of thinking outside the box, but you brought up a really good point there at their end, which is maybe we can think about space a little differently that's along Narvaez, right? So VTA has these 2 sites. We have a lot of space now that is being used for parking. So we want to envision what those uses are. Tonight's purpose was mainly to talk about, housing and introduce you all to some of the housing concepts. But when we begin that access work, we'll also be looking at those spaces for ways that we can improve access. So not just on the existing street itself, but maybe the sidewalks or the existing VTA property. So there could be space that comes from other places, maybe not, but we do think that there are some improvements because Narvaez is really, really important for cyclists. There's a major gap there when you're trying to use the bike path network from south of Branham to go north and connect to the bike path on 87. And we want to figure out a solution to kind of close that gap and make it safer for people. And with regards to the interchange, I know, I wish I had answers for everyone tonight, but because we're just beginning that work, I think what's important for you all to think about when you think about the interchange is what is a solution to you? There's no perfect solution for any one person, right? But I would challenge you all to think about what is it in the interchange that would make it better for you? Do you want to get through it faster? Do you want it to be safer? Do you want to access a different street in a different way? So those are the kinds of things and questions that we're going to be thinking of as part of this study. So think about those things a little bit so that when we come back and talk to you all at probably another community meeting or event in the future, we can get into a little bit more details about ways that we can improve the interchange.
Yes, thank you. I just want to make sure that if you do have, if we do have another community meeting, it would be great that if you can get into, I'm sure that everybody around here is concerned about the safety on Narvaez and Capitol Expressway Interchange. Also is that, like I raised in the Q&A, is that if you add more people, my son go to the elementary on what is the pure, I'm sorry,
okay,
near the library here. Well, also just long day for me, but anyway, my concern, he already told me that the class size is already huge. And I agree, by the time the development is in, my son probably go to high school already. My concern is that for the future kid, future family, if they come in and then there's no address in school, that's really bad in planning.
No, I hear what you're saying, Dad. And maybe the team, we can go back and be a little bit more transparent in the future about, the school, the neighborhood, the schools that are in the neighborhood, and how this project would fit into that, or where kids would go as part of this project. So we could maybe have a little bit more information for the community in the future to help answer some of those questions.
Thank you.
We've had a question pop up in the chat from Mark. Will the Branham project be owner occupied for the homes that are being purchased?
This is Jessica. I will answer that. Yes, they will be owner occupied. Usually with the funding sources associated with affordable home ownership, there's a requirement that those units be owner occupied.
And Debbie, you have your hand up. I'm going to request that you unmute yourself to ask your question.
Okay, are we there?
Is that Debbie? Yes, you're here.
This is Steve, Debbie's husband.
Okay.
So I've read through all the question and answers, and I've listened to all the audio comments, and my initial assessment is there's not a lot of positive feedback from your community here for this project. Are you guys feeling that? Are you sensing it?
In other words, are you going to take into consideration how the community feels about this project? Because even if you only had 5 new houses planned on each of those places, there's not enough parking in our neighborhood.
The impact on Narvaez will be terrible. You have homeless encampments that the VTA can't control now.
I'm not seeing very much from the VTA to handle the problems we have now. And now we're talking about adding a whole slew of new problems. It's very frustrating.
Yeah, I hear you, Debbie and Steve.
We'll get there. We will get there. So, one of the unique things that VTA does that maybe sets us apart is we think about real estate and we can think about places and we can also think about transportation in the same space. And so when we are talking about the development, we really want to make sure that the development has accents that include transportation improvements and other features and amenities that could potentially address some of the concerns that you all brought up, right? Different ways to manage parking, different ways to manage traffic, different ways to make your street safer, all things that you have said to us tonight.
And these all sound like great things to address. So my question would be, does the VTA have a project similar to this that they have executed that we can get feedback from the community that was impacted?
Yes, we have a TOD project built out at Ohlone Chenoweth. We encourage you to reach out to the neighborhood there. And then we also have a similar project built out at Almaden Station. Same goes for there. And we are working actively in communities that will be receiving new transit-oriented development throughout the city.
So these are transit housing projects that you have developed with the shops and the parks and the associated things that we discussed?
So yes. I walk on my walk that I can no longer do on the paths because there's a path at the end of my street and I can't get on it because it's full of homeless people. But I do. On Monday. I used to walk by the Ohlone Chenoweth area, and those places have underground parking, and I observe cars coming in and out of there all of the time. I don't see the tenants really taking public transportation. I don't think putting 120 units on a piece of land is going to encourage people to take public transportation. San Jose is a large place, and it doesn't, it's great if you work in downtown San Jose or if you work in Mountain View. I actually work at Mountain View. I have a stop at the end of Castro Street and I still don't take public transportation because I have to be to work at a certain time. I can't be at all of these stops and get onto the public transit 2 hours before I have to be at work. It's just not doable.
Yeah, we hear you, Debbie, that, maybe transit is not an option for everyone. That driving is the only option for some people. But what we want to think about as part of our project is a range of mobility options for all kinds of people. Maybe something that you could use one day of the week. So we think about autos, we think about bikes, we think about walkers, we think about rollers, and we think about transit rollers as part of our projects.
We'll get more people on the train. Well, we get the people who live in the neighborhood on the train.
Yeah, we don't have the people who already live here get on the train, but you're going to put new people in. I don't see it working. San Jose is just too big of an area, and the train does not go enough places. It's not like we're in New York where you can easily take the subway pretty much anywhere you want to go with, maybe a little walk at the end. This is a huge area, and public transportation just doesn't service all of the area. I just see it's a recipe for disaster.
Say one more thing about transit, and then I think we want to get a few others an opportunity. So when we're talking about our project, we're talking about buses too. So let's not forget our bus network, right? We have service nearby here. And we'd love to know what improvements or places that you all want to go or have access to, right? That's really important for us to hear. You shared with us that, the distance you need to go is not super practical, but maybe if you could use those services to do other smaller trips, maybe say on the weekend or after work to get some type of services, we would like to know those things from you as well. And let's explore that a little bit more when we do our access work. So we'll have specific survey questions and get those kinds of challenging things out on the table so that we better understand maybe some solutions that we can work on here. So thanks for your comments, Debbie. And I think it was Debbie's husband.
Yeah.
Steve, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you very much. We want to make sure that we get to everybody who has their hand up. So,
yep.
Thank you. Ayana, I'm going to request that you unmute yourself and you ask your question.
Hello, hi, my name is Ayana. So I think we've been in the neighborhood for the community for 4 years. I mean, I've been here for 10 years. I lived on the other side of where Capitol and Narvaez area was or is. And so the one issue, a question I was trying to piggyback off of Debbie and Steve is to ask VTA, like, I assume this projection for the project actually takes into account of the future changes with our local transit to try to increase the, I guess, the distance or the stops, right? Because we still have the project that's going on with VTA to connect with essentially is the North Bay stuff, things like. I just wanted to know, does this actually include those kind of conversations that right now transit looks the way it does, but it won't look like that probably in 5 or 10 years from now. So that's one of the questions I had. And then, do you have an actual time frame for these access conversations? Because in the area that we live, I feel like it's very disjointed from the plans that you guys have presented about the Capitol and Narvaez parking lot that will be transformed into this new living and community space that I think does touch on those issues that people have with the distance and the people in the area not having accessibility. Like, are there plans to talk about catwalks or ways to connect the community to these, to this area that is planned?
Yeah. Someone want to take the first part and then I can take the connection part?
I was going to take the connection part too, but I guess
go for it. You got it.
Ayana, I'm glad you brought up that area. We talked to the Silicon Valley, the technical school on Hillsdale, and they told us that a lot of their students will get off the Capitol light rail stop and they don't have a safe way to walk up to Hillsdale. They basically come around Narvaez and then turn left on Hillsdale. And so, as we were talking to people in this area who walk and live in this area, we found that there were a lot of other issues that were coming up with respect to access at these stations. And so as part of that access study, and I think we're really looking at how people move to and from this area and defining that area that we study. And so I think that, given the input that we've gotten tonight and from some of the stakeholder interviews we've done, I think stretching that access to Hillsdale and beyond in that area is we really need to do that, to be thoughtful about how people walk there, how, as Brent mentioned, the bike connections too. And so I think that's definitely something that will be part of the access study.
And so those will happen. I know this is your initial, so is this, because I think there was a slide, I caught a little bit of it and it had this time frame for when those meetings, and I assume the community would be getting reached out, people will reach out and let the community know, because I think that kind of maybe will help with the people who already live here about what's the advantage of having this, how is this going to encourage us to use the system more.
Right. So go ahead, Brett.
I was going to say that's a great perspective, right? So that's one of the things we take into account when we're thinking about our station planning, right? So it's not just the development and new residents who will live there, but we're also thinking about ways that we can address some of the things that are present, right? That are existing, that you all have shared with us. I've got this safety concern on this corner, or my crosswalk's too long here, and we'll be looking at those. It will most likely be the same team you see here or a very similar a group of people from VTA, and we'll be doing that work kind of along or integrated into the same process with the housing work. We want to make them very closely aligned to one another. And most meetings will talk about access and the project. And we may have some special things where we just talk about transportation and access over the next year or so.
And then I think you mentioned something about new bus potential. Are we talking about expanding on the bus routes that are here, or adding new bus lines? Or because I mean, there's like a whole area between Almaden Expressway and 87th that really has limited support transit to get to VTA and access VTA.
So right now, I'm not here to make any commitments, but I mean, those are possible solutions, things that we may consider. So, when we look at future grants or when we're working on other sites, when we learn what those key needs are from the community and we embed them into the project description and the design and the things we want to accomplish in the future, then we can set forth how we get to those things. And it may be a new bus line, it may be changing a bus line, or it may be changing the times that the bus line comes to the station or the frequency that it operates. So again, I'll ask you, you just described one gap, maybe think about some others for the future so that we can note those, or think about the places that you really want to access, and we'll see what we can do to address them.
Okay.
Yeah. Great thoughts. This is about community. So, and community is more than just a building. It's about how you get around and the places and things that you need to be in your community as well. So.
Well, yeah, I mean, I tuned in, I was a little late, but I think it seems like it has been identified that those parking lots aren't being utilized, and they are areas where people are just lingering around, or not. They could be utilized to help some of this housing crisis that we do have here. So that sounds like a good idea, right? That in the right path. But then at the same time, once you bring people here, you do have to at least have, like you mentioned, the accessibility has to be worked out.
All right, we've got a few more hands up. Alan, if you want to ask another question, I've just asked you to unmute yourself. There you go.
Yep. Thank you. So I'll put this out there. There's assumptions around public transit, which I think are dated. That's just my opinion. People are using, because we live out here, which is, far from pretty much where everyone works. So we're looking at other options, things like Uber, Lyft, right? Scooters, electric bikes, other options, right? Renting zip cars, right? As an option in order to address the transit issue that we have, because buses don't get us where we need to go. And the light rail definitely doesn't need it take us where we need to go when we need to get somewhere. So is the VTA looking at stuff like this in terms of their assessment when they're looking at, transit-oriented developments?
Brett, do you want to take this or do you want me to take this?
Go ahead, Jessica.
Alan, you bring up very good points. And yes, these are things we absolutely need to take a look at. And so, for example, I can try to address some of them. For example, Uber pickup and drop off is a big one, right? And so before, we didn't have to think about having designated drop zones for people who are taking Ubers. Now we have to, because, oftentimes they'll drop off at our bus stops, and that interferes with our bus operations. And so that's a great idea, and that's something that we should plan for here. Another one is, it's not quite as, but we see this in other places like the employee shuttles that pick up to bring people to some of their tech jobs. Those shuttles also will park in places like our bus shelters, and that gets in our way, and then we can't be on time. So those are things we absolutely have to do. I love your idea about zip cars. We see it in some other transit-oriented developments like BART does, for example. They have shared vehicles inside the development. So if you need a car and you don't own a car, there are often shared cars that you can rent or share, within your development, so that you can take that car and drive it off to buy your groceries and bring it back. And that kind of helps to reduce, you know, how many cars that we need to have on the road because we have a shared option. So all of these really, how do we adapt to the future of movement? And I think all the ideas that you're bringing up are definitely things that we think about and we want to think more thoughtfully about as we move forward with these projects.
Right, agreed. And so areas like you think of the Branham light rail station, right, and the parking lot area, making it a Uber pickup or drop off area might be interesting, right?
Yeah.
So, okay. So,
I was just going to add. So a great example is like for our station at Tamian, just north of this location. You know, when we did our early access work as part of some development work that we're doing there as well on a new project. We looked early on, like, what are those things that are coming to the station? How many Ubers come every morning? How many people ride in on a scooter? How many people bike to the station? How many people drop off? How many people take the bus? How many take the light rail? So on and so on and so on. And then we asked the community if that's reflective of how they use the station. Do they want to improve on those things? What would they like to have us focus on more? Maybe like zip car parking, or have a shared bike station at the station where there's none there now. So you can get really creative on all of those options that you've brought up.
All right, thank you.
And it looks like we have one final comment from SP5ST, asking you to unmute now.
Yes, first, just want to say I'd like to hear what Debbie and Steve said. Brett, you mentioned something about having to go places and get things. I can't imagine getting onto a bus or a light rail with a couple of bags of groceries. Okay. San Jose is, as you know, is laid out in such a way that it requires a vehicle. I don't know how bringing, how you're going to address that, to tell you the truth. But thank you very much. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you for your comment. You know, even in the darkest days of the pandemic, VTA had 25,000 people riding our service. And those were people that were using it for essential things, to work, to buy their groceries, to go places. And I know maybe it is hard for some of us to imagine other options to do those types of trips, like grocery shop, or, you know, go pick up candy for grandma, not in a car, or take your kids to a medical appointment. But when we think about our system, it's not just the exact place around the station. We want to think about other things that are along those routes where you could maybe do those things on different days, or use transit or biking or other things to do those in your community. So we realize there's not a perfect solution for everyone, but we want to hear as many challenges as you all have so that we can figure out a way to address as many of them as possible. I can't guarantee we can improve every single thing, but we will work to learn what those are and try to figure out solutions on how to address them for the future. And one way to do that is part of a project like this.
It looks like we have one last hand up from Paul Welch. Ask you to unmute yourself.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, good. Oh, sorry.
No problem.
Just a few things. Initially, I had observed, it looks like we're doing a lot of preliminary stuff before there's even been like any sort of architectural plans for the space. So that's just an observation that I'll have to take into consideration in the future. I would like to admit, though, that it was kind of difficult to be able to find the exact place for the Zoom link for this particular meeting. And I was hoping in the future that they would be broadcast much more broadly. For example, like this is being live streamed on YouTube, for example. If the link to the Zoom meeting was there, that would be fantastic. If it was also posted on Twitter, on VTA's social media, that would be also fantastic. I'm trying to think what else I had on my mind, because there must be other forms of social media, like on Facebook or something, that would also be fantastic. What else was there? I had some things written down. Yeah, are there any particular height restrictions to the area?
Hi, Paul. This is Jessica. Great ideas. I think that especially the suggestions for the Zoom meetings, the Twitter posts, and however else we can make this more accessible. We will do this at the next meeting. And if it doesn't get done, I'm going to make sure it is, because I want to demonstrate that we are clearly listening. That's a great suggestion. With respect to the heights, at Branham, I believe the height there, and this is, we have to double check, and this is really because we don't have a development partner on board right now.
Okay.
And so, gosh, I know the zoning is MUN, and I can't remember. I think it's 35 feet. I wish I had the answer for you. This is something we will look up, and then we'll answer
okay.
the Q&A. But I think it's 35 feet at Branham is my memory. And at Cal, there's a variety of different zonings, so we would have to check that out. But I will.
Oh, okay. What else was on my mind? How did you define affordable housing within the scope of this project? Like in terms of like a ballpark budget?
Are you talking about how much it costs to build affordable housing, or are you asking
No.
what their incomes would be?
No, I mean, like, what would the cost of the individual units be for what is considered affordable housing?
That's a great question. I'm going to hand this over to Natalie from the Office of Supportive Housing. She can give some more detail on that.
Sorry, just trying to unmute. The question is about tenant selection or income levels for tenants, or both?
Well, more specifically, like, say, for example, like, I'm assuming that's like, there's going to be specific areas that are plotted out for livable space, and each livable space is going to have, for example, like a certain cost, either as a rental fee or as a purchasable price that would be paid through some sort of a mortgage, for example. And I just wanted to get an idea of how much that rent or mortgage would be.
Yeah, that's a great question. So in both cases, whether you're renting or whether you're purchasing, at the beginning of the project, the developer will identify the target income levels of the different tenants or the different buyers. And there's typically a wide range of income levels that are being targeted. So for each individual unit or household, it's priced according to what the household who's intended to live there can pay. So typically it's priced to 30% or 1/3 of that household's income. Does that make sense?
Oh, okay. So it's not like an actual like specific integer value that's been laid out. A little confusing, but I guess I understand. I guess that makes things a little bit more complicated.
I'm giving you kind of the broad brush, but when there's a developer on board and when there's a specific project proposal, they will lay out, okay, here's the specific rent or here's the specific mortgage that would be required for each unit. And then the developer will submit a marketing plan of how they're going to accomplish that selection. And then they will be selecting folks according to that plan and slotting them into the appropriate unit to set them up for success.
Okay. I was just curious because like there's different types of budgets that are available. Like some of us are not lucky. We only get paid like $15.45 an hour. And then there's some of us who are more lucky and we get paid like maybe 20 to 30 an hour, and like some of us are part-time and some of us are full-time, and that creates all sorts of budgets that may or may not be under 50K a year. So if it was possible for someone who isn't making 50K a year or way less, like even just 25, and they would be able to afford the accommodations over at this location for the specific transit-oriented developments, I think that would be a step in the right direction.
Yeah, Paul, I was frantically looking at all my screen because I have all of these numbers somewhere. And
I
so
know, right?
Yeah, I just pulled them up. So if, just to kind of put numbers to it. So you were saying someone who earns like $30,000 a year, if we were to price an apartment, like a studio, for example, at that level, it would be about $875 for a rental for someone who earns about $35,000 a year. So that's what it could look like on the rental side. And typically the way these affordable housing projects works is we want to target a range of incomes so that people from different sectors and based on their wages will be able to afford. So for example, if your household earns $75,000 a year, for example, there could be a 2-bedroom about $1,700 that's available to that person. So it's significantly less than the average $3,000 in the market, and it would be much more akin to what they would be eligible to pay. On the home ownership side, I'll go to a household that makes about $95,000 a year. So, we kind of, that's the construction worker and a home health aide, for example. Their mortgage would be about $325,000. That's what they could afford to pay. And in a project like at Branham, there would be an ownership unit that household would be eligible to purchase. Again, at the home ownership level, you want to kind of create multiple levels of affordable home ownership prices that different types of people can buy. And but hopefully that gives you like a sense of something that would be eligible. So, a unit that would be eligible in the kind of household that could qualify to live there.
Okay, I was just curious because I just know that I guess this sort of tier-based, income-based process for each and every individual space is a unique approach that does sound familiar, but it's not something that I personally have that much experience with, to be quite honest. I was just thinking it would be a lot more simpler than that. Like, here's a spot, it's this much. If you're willing to budget within this spot, feel free. If it's not within that budget, then okay. If you're not able to do this, then X, Y, or Z, or we can make accommodations for this kind of budget, and so on and so forth. But I see that it's not just a bunch of clear numbers. It's derived from specific incomes, which I guess makes sense considering how complicated housing markets are around here, if not unforgiving. But yeah, I guess this helps clear some things up a little bit.
Yeah, I think what would be helpful, Paul, is when developers come on board, they'll have an array. They can show you, okay, we'll have this number of units, 2 bedrooms at this price. If you make this much, you would qualify. I think that it would probably be more helpful when someone is on board to lay it out. But we can put in an FAQ out kind of showing the general incomes in Santa Clara County and what the equivalent rents would be. And then you can also kind of slot yourself to see where you would fit, or, people who are interested in this can understand where they fit too.
Ooh, that sounds nice. A little chart or a table would be nice.
Yep, that we can publish that after this call on the website.
Oh, good. Let's see, did I have any other questions? Pretty sure there's going to be air filters for the air quality because it's so close to 87. What else was there? I do remember that a lot of other people had some feedback about specific concerns with land use policies and whatnot. I really can't say much to that effect, but I do recall that the transit-oriented development would substantially improve the ability for people to actually access transit in general because of its close proximity, and being able to develop in and around those kinds of places would reduce the amounts of vehicle miles traveled by automobiles, for example. I know a lot of people are always worried about parking and those sorts of things. So if anybody was still on who is curious about those kinds of inquiries, that's, I feel, is something that should be important to know. Also, I mentioned this earlier through some typing in the Q&A section, but it's possible to have the same amounts of roadway or lanes available for cars before and after the project, and still incorporate bicycle lanes by adjusting the width of the actual individual lanes for the cars themselves. For example, like there's quite a few lanes in and around the area that I'm familiar with who are just kind of like implicitly just for cars, but there's always like this little implied bicycle lane, and just being able to like put a line there usually helps, kind of denotes where everything is, and some things can be adjusted accordingly so that everybody's able to be accommodated.
Yeah, we definitely hear you, Paul. Those are great ideas that we can get into more detail when we do the access work. And we'd love to know kind of more specifics. I do think we are trying to wrap up tonight. I don't want to cut you short, but
no worries.
Jot your ideas down, email them to community.outreach@vta.org.
Oh, so let me write that down.
Yep, I'll say it again. And if we have a slide, we could pull that up. community.outreach@vta.org. So send those comments into the team, and Jolene and Kathleen can capture those for the group, and we'll make sure that maybe we can address some of those in our future work.
Okay, let me just take a look here, because I know there's some other articles I was able to stumble across floating around here and there that might have some useful information just in general for anything transit related. So you said it was community.outreach at VTA, .vta.org, or?
Correct. It's community.outreach@vta.org. And our last screen, or the last slide that we have, will show that as well.
And we're just going to take one final question tonight. And I know, Daryl, you've had your hand up for quite a while. Congratulations, you are our final question. I'm going to request that you unmute yourself.
Hi.
Hey.
Can you hear me?
We can.
I have a question regarding Article 34 of the California State Constitution, which calls for a special election when there's going to be development on public-owned property. And I was wondering, can we invoke this Article 34 and have a special election for the community to vote on this?
Jesse, do you want to take that?
Yeah. Hi, Daryl. I think I answered this also in the chat. And so wanted to share with you live that we are not legal professionals, and this is a legal question. We advise that you speak with somebody who may be able to help you with that question professionally.
It would seem that VTA would be able to answer this question. I mean, this is an important question. Article 34 is part of the California State Constitution. If you can't answer it, who can?
Well, Daryl, none of us on this line are attorneys. If you have additional questions, you can definitely send them in. We can consult with our legal counsel and perhaps they would be able to answer. But in tonight's meeting, we don't have legal professionals here to provide advice on that.
Can I ask you one last question? Are you aware of Article 34?
Yes, we are.
Okay, thank you.
I want to thank everybody so much for all of your questions. If we didn't have the chance to get to your specific question, I'd recommend actually if you scroll through the Q&A, we've answered about, looks like 155 questions that have come in tonight. So if you want to, take a scroll through there, and also as Jolene just mentioned a second ago, there is an email address. We more than welcome questions and comments if we didn't get to them tonight. Those will be in just about, I think it's not the next slide, it's the slide after. The next slide, if you can switch over.
She said she did, but
if you could just switch over to the next slide. We have, oh, I'm sorry, go back. That was my fault. We have one final poll to ask you. This is, we know how we've mentioned our access study a couple of times tonight. We have some very initial questions to get an idea of how you all use the site. This will help inform our access study as we work on this over the next couple of months. I'm going to go ahead and launch this. So you should see it right here. Nikki, there's two questions, so be sure to scroll down and just answer those two. Oh, go ahead, I'm sorry.
Christina, can I just throw in, we really want to know how you're currently accessing Branham and Capitol stations. And I know Brent talked a lot today about the access study, and these are questions that we'll be able to pass on to our planning team as they move forward with that.
Right. So we've got 9 people, 10 who've answered so far. Got about half of the people who are still here. You held out with us till the end of the night. We're very appreciative of that, to have this conversation with us and to let us know your thoughts and ask your questions. We'll just give a little bit more time to get some final answers to help inform this access study and give us a good idea of how people are getting around at Capitol and Branham. So very helpful, much appreciated. All right, we're at 70% response. Just give it a couple more seconds for anybody else who hasn't answered yet. All right. We've got mostly drivers, a handful of walkers. We've got one light rail user, welcome. And it looks like 70% of you answered that you do not take the train, but we do have people who both drive and park to the station, as well as walk or take their bike ride to their station and use our light rail. So thank you so much. This really does help inform how we move forward in our access study. And if we want to just move to our next slide. Thank you so much. We've got, first of all, well, I guess we're moving from bottom to top here. At the bottom, we have the community outreach email address. This is what Jolene mentioned earlier. If you have anything that we did not get to tonight, any questions you still want answered, any comments that you didn't feel we were able to respond to, please email them there. They will get to us. We also have a community engagement survey. If you are up for taking that, that would be much appreciated. And if you want to sign up for the mailing list, keep involved, keep informed as this project is going on. We've got 2 websites, vta.org/capital development and vta.org/Branham development. Those will keep you in the loop as anything goes on, any future community meetings, any updates, any big movement in the project. You'll be one of the first to find out. So if you're interested, please feel free to go to any of those websites.
Christina, can I interrupt really quick?
Of course, yeah.
If you guys need help with signing up, feel free to contact us through community.outreach@vta.org, and we can help you with that. Then also, I want to share that the community engagement survey, that will launch once we end the meeting. So please, please, please take the time to fill that out.
All right. That's all the content we have for you tonight. Thank you so much to everyone who held out with us to the very end. Thank you so much for your questions, for your comments. This really does help us as we move forward. And just thank you for spending your evening with us. Much appreciated.
Bye. Good night.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
community.